Welcome to Family History Mysteries, a podcast that tells the stories uncovered through family history research, the unexpected stories of everyday people. I am an avid family historian who has been compiling my family tree for over 15 years, with nearly 20,000 people recorded in my trees. And please put a review on my podcast. That will certainly help in getting the word out there and creating more listenership. Episode 269, The Ballarat Gold Robbery. On the afternoon of Tuesday, the 18th of September 1883, Mr. James Denham Pinnock, manager of the Ballarat branch of the Commercial Banking Company, prepared a gold shipment for transfer to the main office in Melbourne. The shipment contained 16 bars of gold weighing over 120 pounds and 670 pounds of mutilated notes that were sent to be destroyed. It was placed into a secure iron-bound wooden strongbox. The manager checked that all was in order, and that evening he caught the mail train from Ballarat to Melbourne with the box safely deposited in the railway safe on board the package carriage. Upon arriving at Melbourne Spencer Street Station, Pinnock took a horse-drawn cab from the station to the head office branch of the bank in Collins Street, the strongbox riding beside him on the seat. By the time he arrived at the bank at 11 o'clock that evening, the premises was closed and the main bank's strong room had already been secured. Pinnock was met by a trusted employee of the bank, a man named Alfred Corbett, who was actually employed as the caretaker and messenger. Corbett had a set of keys which fitted one of the lower bank vaults, and it was considered that the safe within this vault would be quite as secure as the main vault, or overnight at least, and the Ballarat gold and notes could be stored there until the following morning. At 10:20 a.m. the next morning, Pinnock went to the safe and discovered that pins had been inserted and bent into the keyhole. A locksmith was called, and when the safe was opened, it was empty. Interestingly, 2 years prior, in May 1881, 1,000 sovereigns were stolen from the same branch. On the 22nd of September 1883, the Melbourne Australian outlined the extensive gold robbery at the Commercial Bank. One of the most extensive robberies of gold which has ever taken place in this city was discovered on Wednesday at the Commercial Bank. It will doubtless be remembered that some time ago a bag containing 1,000 sovereigns mysteriously disappeared from the bank, and notwithstanding all the inquiries made by the detectives and the bank officials, no trace of it was ever found. In the present robbery, 14 bars of gold, weighing together nearly 1,200 ounces, and between 600 and 700 pounds in banknotes has been stolen, making the total loss equal to £5,000. How the robbery was effected is not known. According to the usual practice of the bank, Mr. J.D.C. Pinnock, the manager of the branch at Ballarat, apprised the general manager, Mr. H.G. Turner, by letter of his intention to bring the gold from Ballarat to Melbourne on Tuesday evening. This fact was only known to such of the bank officials as it was necessary to inform, and amongst the number was the messenger, Alfred Corbett, as he would have had to have been in attendance to receive the gold and assist in locking it up in one of the strong rooms. Mr. Pinnock arrived by the last train on Tuesday evening, and the box containing 16 bars of gold, weighing 1,977 ounces, and a bundle of mutilated banknotes, supposed to be the amount of £1,200, was safely conveyed into the strong room. The box was then opened and the 16 bars of gold placed inside one of Milner's burglar-proof safes, especially kept for this purpose, the messenger checking the bars with Mr. Pinnock. He has a key of this safe, and after safely depositing the bullion, he locked the safe and took the key away with him. Mr. Turner also has a key of the safe, which he on Tuesday evening locked up in his private safe, and the key of the latter was in his possession. The strong room in which this safe is kept is situated at the rear of the premises in the basement, and is entered first by a solid iron door nearly half an inch in thickness, fitted with one of Chubb's patent locks. Then there is another iron grating door, which is also secured by one of Chubb's patent locks. The keys of these doors are usually handed to the messenger every night after the business of the day is over. He had the keys on Tuesday evening, and after the bullion had been locked up in the safe, he locked both the doors in Mr. Pinnock's presence. Corbett says that on Wednesday morning he went to unlock these doors and found some grit in the lock of the outer door. It was removed, and then the key acted on the lock. At that time, nothing was known or suspected about the robbery.
At 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, Mr. Pinnock arrived at the bank for the purpose of delivering up the gold and having it weighed prior to its removal to the mint. On going into the room and attempting to insert the key into the lock of the safe, it met with an obstruction, which on examination proved to be a large pin and a smaller one. A locksmith was called and the pins were carefully extracted. The safe was then opened with Mr. Pinnock's key, when to his astonishment and that of Mr. Turner, the manager, only 2 bars of gold were found in the safe. An investigation was instantly made into the circumstances attending the depositing of the bullion in the safe when the facts as above stated were elicited. Mr. Turner then communicated with the Detective Office, and Detectives Considine, Nixon and Ward were sent to investigate the case. They thoroughly examined the bank premises in all parts from the roof to the basement, but not the slightest trace of any attempt to break into the premises could be found. All the doors and windows were intact. The least mark of a chisel or other sharp instrument would have shown, as the premises has only been freshly painted. As an extra precaution for the safety of the premises, under a staircase within a yard of the door of the lower strong room, a bulldog is placed every night, and he was there as usual on Tuesday, but he does not appear to have been disturbed, otherwise it is supposed that his barking would have aroused the messenger, who resides in the rear of the premises. With the exception of the bullion and notes, the only article missed is a small black bag belonging to the messenger, which has been left in the place he sits in between the front office and the manager's room. The back gate was securely fastened as usual, and the night watchman stated that when he tried the gates at 2 a.m. they were locked. We may mention that the other strong room, which is on the ground floor and is known as the Treasury, is similarly protected with one solid and one iron grating door, fitted with patent locks, but no attempt was made to tamper with these locks. The detectives in charge of the case were working up to the late hour last night, but they are very reticent about it, the only information to be obtained from them being an acknowledgement that they have not the slightest idea how or by whom the robbery was committed. As stated above, the mutilated notes were supposed to amount to £1,200, but a telegram was received from Ballarat stating that there was only £670 in notes. They are believed to be all old notes belonging to the commercial bank, which would have been withdrawn from circulation, but whether the bundle contained any notes on other banks is not known, as the list with the numbers and other particulars were also stolen. The 2 bars of gold left in the safe were the heaviest of the lot, and they weighed together £818. It seems that about 12 months ago, in consequence of certain well-known criminals being at large, the bank authorities received intimation that it would be advisable for some persons to sleep in the bank. Arrangements were accordingly made for 2 young men, sons of Corbett the messenger, to sleep on an ornamental balcony which enabled them to overlook the principal offices of the bank. Nothing having transpired, this extra vigilance was recently relaxed, as the patent locks on the doors of the strong room and the bulldog placed in the building every night were considered sufficient. The premises was again thoroughly searched, but on Wednesday the detectives found no trace of any attempt of having made to break into the bank. At noon a meeting of the directors was held, and it was unanimously decided to offer a reward of £1,000 for the recovery of the property and the conviction of the thief or thieves. Since the amount of the reward was made known, several statements have been made by independent persons in reference to the robbery, but upon being investigated by the detectives, they've all proved to be erroneous. In fact, they were almost immediately plagued by callers once the reward was out. They claimed they had information that would lead to the arrest of the culprit or culprits. Some callers stated that they'd had dreams during which the location of the stolen gold had been revealed. The police officers listened patiently to each of the callers, checked their stories with dogged determination. The Melbourne press later stated that an old gentleman called at the bank yesterday afternoon, that was the 21st of September, and represented himself as the Son of God, and stated it had been revealed to him where the gold was. He was, however, he said, not permitted to speak about it, but would write the account as revealed to him by his father. The detectives followed many false leads. One of these involved a young man who'd driven up in a buggy to a station and fancy goods shop owned by Mr. E. Davis in Chapel Street, Prahran. When the gentleman entered the shop, Davis saw that he had a large roll of banknotes in his hand. The customer told Davis that he wished to purchase a present for a lady. He selected a lady's bag and paid for it with 2 old £1 notes. After he left the shop, Davis noticed that the customer had dropped another £1 on the counter. When the customer did not return for the note, Davis became suspicious. No one would ever normally neglect to return for some lost money, and after the shopkeeper heard of the bank robbery, he checked the pound note and saw that it too was an old one, and it should probably have been withdrawn from circulation. Was his customer the wanted bank robber? Davis was unsure, but he contacted the police with his suspicions. All 3 banknotes were handed over to the police after Davis had signed them so that he could claim them back once the investigation had been completed. However, the lead was to prove useless and the banknotes were not among those stolen from the bank. Less than a week after the robbery took place, they found their man. In the Melbourne Argus, there was a large attendance of spectators in the City Police Court on Monday, while the precincts of the courthouse were thronged with persons anxious to get a glimpse of the young man, Richard Henry Corbett, who's charged with having broken into the commercial bank in Collins Street, stealing 14 bars of gold and £670 in notes. On the prisoner being placed in the dock, he cast his eyes on the ground and never looked up. On the application of the police, he was remanded for 8 days. After the prisoner had been remanded in the City Police Court yesterday and removed to his cell, and prior to the prison van leaving for the Melbourne jail, he expressed a wish to Sub-Inspector Brown to see his mother before going to jail. Brown accordingly went to the bank, but Mrs. Corbett was too ill to leave the house. One of the daughters, who only arrived from the country yesterday morning, went instead. This was his sister Emily, and another brother, Charles, also went with Emily. On arriving at the watch house, the prisoner was taken out of his cell by Sub-Inspector Brown and Detective Nixon and taken to one of the side rooms of the courthouse where the interview took place in presence of the officers. They pressed Richard to reveal the whereabouts of the stolen gold so there would be no further suspicions placed upon the other members of the family. The family had been interrogated for many hours on the previous days. And once Corbett was aware of this, finally and reluctantly, he agreed to divulge the information. So how did these detectives work out that it was the son of the caretaker? Richard Henry Corbett was assisting his father in the bank in 1881 when the robbery of 1,000 sovereigns was committed. He was suspected at the time of having been connected with the affair but was nowhere to be found. The family asserted that he was in New South Wales. The father was dispatched to Sydney, but a telegram was received stating that the young Corbett had gone to New Zealand about a fortnight ago. The evidence was not considered satisfactory, and the detectives turned their attention to discovering the whereabouts of the young man. The first intimation the detectives received that young Corbett was still in Melbourne was communicated by Mr. Henry Thorne, manager of the Coffee Palace in Bourke Street East, who was acquainted with him. Mr. Thorne informed Sub-Inspector Brown of the fact and also supplied him with a photo of the prisoner. Subsequently, his sister made a statement to Detective Potter which confirmed the information previously received and which ultimately led to the arrest. Later in the day, Detectives Brown, Potter, Nixon and Ward proceeded to the bank and took down in writing the statements of the father of the accused and other members of the family. But the particulars obtained were so meagre, it was decided to apply to the magistrate for warrants to arrest the whole family. The detectives were confident the prisoner had not gone to Sydney as represented by some members of the family, as a telegram had been sent to Sydney and all the trains and steamers arriving were closely watched, and also certain places which it was known the prisoner frequented in the sister colony. Information was obtained on Saturday night that young Corbett was seen in Melbourne only a day or two previously and was discovered at 4 o'clock on Sunday afternoon at Mars Hotel in Sandridge Road, where he appears to have been living for around 10 days under the name of R.H. Clinton. Sub-Inspector Brown and Detectives Potter, Nixon and Ward went to the hotel at the hour stated and, finding the man they were in search of sitting in the parlour, questioned him as to his knowledge of the robbery, which at first he denied and said he hadn't had anything to do with it. He was taken upstairs to his bedroom, however, where the detectives made a search and discovered 3 of the stolen bars of gold in the pocket of an overcoat hanging on a peg behind the door, together with £41 of the stolen notes, £39 in sovereigns and half-sovereigns, and £32, 5 shillings and 2 pence in silver and coppers. A new 6-chambered revolver, fully charged, and a box of ammunition was found in the chest of drawers in the room, a sword stick and a key evidently belonging to one of the bank's safes. On finding himself outwitted, the prisoner stated he had duplicate keys made for all of the bank safes 12 months ago at Mr. Clark's shop in Little Collins Street, with the intention of robbing the institution as soon as he could afford the opportunity of obtaining sufficient plunder to compensate him for the risk. The robbery was effected with the duplicate keys. He stated he was in the vicinity of the bank when Mr. Pinnock arrived with the gold and while the box was being removed from the cab, he slipped through the front door in Collins Street, which was opened, and secreted himself behind the desks until the place had been securely locked up. When everything appeared to be quiet, he stole down to the strong room, removed the notes and as much of the gold as he could carry in a small bag. Corbett told the police that after leaving the bank, he'd gone to the swamp behind the military barracks on St Kilda Road, where he dug a shallow hole into which he deposited the gold, taking with him only the 3 bars which were found in his grey coat pockets. After a good deal of persuasion, the prisoner yielded to the wish of his relatives and stated that a portion of the proceeds of the robbery would be found concealed in the recess of the 3rd window in the public banking room. He was replaced in his cell and the officers proceeded at once to the bank, where they met Detectives Potter and Ward. A search of the spot was at once commenced and the prisoner's statement was found to be correct. It seems that the recess alluded to, where the iron revolving shutters are concealed and where apparently panelling had not been disturbed for years. Such a hiding place was never thought of, as there is a very large and heavy table for the accommodation of customers in the bank standing in front of it. On the panel being removed, the detectives found 3 bars of gold and £470 in notes, the latter being in the same order and condition as when deposited in the iron safe by Mr. Pinnock. A number of the bank officials were assembled around the detectives while the examination was being made, and on the gold being discovered, they were so elated at the success that they gave the detectives 3 hearty cheers. The gold found is valued at £2,000. The notes £470 which were found, together with £112 5 shillings and 2 pence, secured when the prisoner was arrested, makes a total of £582 6 shillings and 2 pence of the cash recovered, out of the £670 stolen. Hopes are entertained that today the prisoner will supply such information as will lead to the recovery of the remaining 8 bars of gold and thus clear the other members of his family of any suspicion that might rest on any one of them having been implicated with him in the robbery. When arrested, he asserted that he planned and committed the robbery by himself, and so far his statement appears to be correct. The detectives worked until a late hour last night, further investigating the case, but their labours did not result in anything fresh being discovered. Upon a further interview, he'd made the decision to show the detectives where the remainder of the gold was buried and was immediately taken to the scene. However, the police could find no trace of the missing gold, and it was evident from the total absence of footmarks and the prisoner's manner that he was misleading the officers. Corbett seemed to be particularly agitated and may have attempted to escape had the officers not been especially watchful. In this, Corbett was probably attempting to emulate the actions and successes of another gold robber who'd managed to gain his freedom in a similar manner. This was the notorious Martin Weiberg, who I did an episode on, episode number 86. The prisoner was therefore removed to the City Watch House and locked up on a charge of feloniously stealing 14 bars of gold and £1,000 in notes, the property of the bank, and the detectives continued their investigations in a view of ascertaining the whereabouts of the unrecovered portion of the stolen property. While staying at Mars Hotel, the prisoner represented himself as the son of a banker. He dressed well and appeared to be well supplied with money. His story was readily believed by the licensee. He is an athletic-looking, muscular man, 23 years of age, and was apprenticed to the blacksmith's trade by his father, but after 4 years gave up the calling and was taken into the commercial bank as an assistant messenger. In April 1881, whilst in that position, a robbery of £1,000 took place at the bank and he was suspected, but no evidence could be obtained to connect him with the robbery, and shortly afterwards his services were dispensed with. In the November following the robbery, which had blown over, young Corbett gave it out that he'd won $1,000 in a racing sweep, and he at once set up as a bookmaker and a backer of racehorses, but was not successful, although he was understood to follow the turf in Tasmania, Queensland and New South Wales. He was supposed to have been in Sydney at the time the present robbery was committed, and his family stoutly insisted upon this point. As a matter of fact, the prisoner went to Sydney 2 months ago and reported there that he was going to Queensland, but instead he double-backed for the purpose of carrying out the robbing of the bank. The following statement is made by Mr. Thomas Easton, licensee of the hotel. The accused came to my hotel a month ago under the name of R.H. Clinton. He said he just arrived on the steamer Nemesis from Sydney, and he was travelling with his father, who was a proprietor of a large sugar plantation near Brisbane. He asked if he could be accommodated with board and lodging and engaged a back room, upstairs. He said the length of his stay all depended on his circumstances. He was very regular in his habits, he never drank to excess and was only out after hours once or twice, once quite recently when he did not come home until nearly 2 a.m. I was in bed at the time and I got up to let him in, but did not see whether he had anything with him because I did not take a light to the door with me. His conduct in the house was gentlemanly. He always read the newspapers. He was never visited by any male person, but on several occasions a young woman, whom I yesterday became aware was his sister, came to visit him and told me she was his cousin. A letter addressed R.H. Clinton arrived one day. That day he was not at home, and the young woman called in the afternoon and asked whether such a letter had come and whether Clinton had received it. On being told that he had not, she asked it might be given to her, and she said she was the writer, but I declined to deliver it to her. He informed me the other day that he would probably be going away on Monday evening to Sydney to meet his father, the sugar planter there. A telegram from Melbourne on Tuesday says, the remainder of the gold and notes stolen from the commercial bank was recovered today. Corbett offered to the detectives to show them where the balance of the gold was and stated it was somewhere in the Mordialloc district. There was a legal ramification in allowing Corbett out of jail to take him down to Mordialloc. In order to be free to lead the officers to the gold, he technically would have to be bailed. An application was made to Mr. Call, the police magistrate, who stated that he was not empowered to allow bail, and so bail was finally arranged through the Crown Law Department. The bank's general manager, Mr. Turner, and the senior police investigating officer, Sub-Inspector Brown, actually provided the bail money of £200 each on the understanding that Corbett would surrender to answer to the charge at 5 o'clock on the same day. Corbett, very carefully guarded by all the police investigating team, was taken by dray to Mordialloc soon afterwards. Detective Nixon was armed with a fully charged 6-chamber revolver to provide for possible contingencies. At Mordialloc, Corbett instructed the driver of the dray to take the first turn to the right, which led to a back road running between Brighton and Mordialloc. At a place surrounded by tea tree scrub, about half a mile behind Renaissance Hotel, Corbett called a halt, dismounted from the dray, walked deliberately to a spot of sandy ground between the road and the beach, and stamping his foot on the ground said, "This is one of the places where part of the gold and notes has been planted." Detective Nixon and Mr. William Turner, the inspector of branches of the commercial bank, who also came on the treasure hunt, went down on their knees and began to scrape away at the sand. Meanwhile, Corbett was moving nervously and excitedly about. When Nixon and Turner had dug a hole about 15 inches deep, they came upon 2 gold bars and a hermetically sealed pickle bottle containing £71 in notes. After this discovery, Corbett moved away for about 10 yards in an easterly direction and indicated another spot where gold would be found. He did not speak, but simply pointed with his foot, and Nixon began to scrape away at the sand. There, 12 inches down, he found the last remaining 6 bars of gold. The Colonial Press later reported, there were no indications whether about the spot to show that the ground had been disturbed, and it was evident that Corbett must have taken the bearings very accurately to have enabled him to point out the position of the treasure so easily. The ground had been stamped down and made firm, and loose sand and tea tree leaves had been scattered about indiscriminately to prevent the possibility of attention being attracted to the spot. On being questioned as to how he discovered the spot so easily, Corbett stated that he'd been in the habit of visiting Mordialloc and having been frequently about the locality where he buried the treasure, he was well acquainted with the place and kept the spot in his mind. After recovering the gold, the police returned Corbett to Melbourne. During the journey, Corbett became somewhat more communicative and told the officers that he had been in Melbourne for a month prior to the robbery. He said he'd originally intended leaving New South Wales for New Zealand, but instead he came to Melbourne about a week prior to the robbery and decided to use his keys to steal any shipment of gold that might appear at the bank. He knew that large quantities of gold frequently were being sent down to the bank from various gold mines and that he only had to watch and wait for an opportunity. He admitted that he saw Mr. Pinnock arrive with his strongbox and he'd slipped into the bank to conceal himself. He said the town clock was striking 12 as he used the keys to the front door of the bank that were hanging conveniently inside to open the door and let himself out. He pulled the door closed and the lock slipped into place. The street had been deserted, and so with a leisurely gait he walked down Queen Street, over the Falls Bridge, and threw his duplicate set of keys into the Yarra, although one of the keys was later found in his room. He then walked on through Moray Street to Albert Park, where he planted the golden notes in high grass under the third clump of trees from Emerald Hill. Corbett then returned to his hotel at Sandridge at about 1 a.m. That same day he hired a buggy and drove to the place where he temporarily hid the loot. Recovering the gold, he took it out of the bank bag, which he left in the grass, hoping it would be discovered and avert suspicion away from his family. When crossing the Yarra on his way to Sandridge, he threw the duplicate keys of the strong room into the river. A day or two after the robbery, he engaged a vehicle to take 8 of the bars of gold and a portion of the stolen notes to Mordialloc, where he planted the plunder. He felt sure he would have no difficulty in subsequently removing what he had left in the bank. The detectives are very jubilant at the recovery of the whole of the stolen property. He said he was positive that his father did not know of his presence in the colony. His sister was the only person who knew that he was in Melbourne, and she kept the fact a profound secret at his special request. He was very sorry at having committed the robbery and said he deeply regretted the disgrace that he thoughtlessly brought upon his family. There was not going to be any long drawn-out trial because Corbett made it perfectly clear when he appeared before the Chief Justice that he would plead guilty to the charges. Corbett was brought before the Mayor, Mr. J. Dodgson, the Police Magistrate, Mr. Call, and a bench of magistrates in October 1883. He was defended by Mr. Seabright, who pointed out that while his client intended to plead guilty, Seabright wanted the depositions to be as pure as possible. Sub-Inspector Brown told how he'd conducted the investigation that led to Corbett's arrest at Mars Hotel and the arrest itself. Seabright asked Brown if Corbett had been cautioned when arrested, and Brown admitted that he had not done so. Seabright then claimed that as no caution had been issued, the police officer's testimony was inadmissible in court. However, the solicitor's protestations proved useless, and the evidence was ruled admissible. Then on the 15th of October 1883, Corbett appeared before the Central Criminal Court, and as he'd promised, he pled guilty to the charges, thus saving the Crown the cost of a lengthy trial. He was simply remanded for sentencing. As a convicted criminal, he again came before the court at the end of the sessions to receive his sentence. And on the 27th of October 1883 in the Melbourne Advocate, in the Central Criminal Court on Wednesday before His Honour the Chief Justice, Richard Henry Corbett, who pled guilty to stealing bullion and notes from the Commercial Bank in Melbourne, was put forward to receive sentence. In reply to the usual question, the prisoner said he had nothing to say. The Crown Prosecutor said that Sub-Inspector Brown, with a view of redeeming a promise made to the prisoner, desired to state what assistance the prisoner lent to the police in recovering the stolen gold and notes. When Corbett took the officers down to Mordialloc, the pressure on him was incredible, and after a most stubborn resistance to every argument of reason, he did lead the officers to the remainder of the bullion. However, one of the incentives to reveal the location of the gold was that the police officers would speak up for him at his trial, and by returning the gold he would almost certainly receive a shorter sentence. His Honour said that he could not influence him to alter the sentence which he felt called upon to pass. He said he could only regard the prisoner as a criminal who'd pled guilty for a crime of extraordinary and singularly audacity. He did not refer so much to the amount of the gold, but the fact that the robbery was committed in the midst of our city and implicated innocent men. Every person in the bank, including the prisoner's own family, must have felt a certain amount of suspicion attached to them. What the prisoner did subsequent to his arrest, His Honour could not consider. The sentence of the court was that he be imprisoned and kept to hard labour for 6 years. And a little more on the 1,000 sovereigns that were stolen from the Commercial Bank on the 16th of April 1881. It says the prisoner was employed at the time at the bank as an assistant messenger, and at the close of the day's business, a bag containing 1,000 sovereigns, instead of being taken to the strong room, was inadvertently left by the teller, Mr. Napier, under the counter. On the Friday, Mr. Napier made up his cash balance after the doors were closed and found a few pounds short. He set to work to discover the discrepancy, but was not able to do so up to tea time. He left to get his tea and then returned in a short interval. About 9:30 in the evening, the mistake was discovered, and Mr. Napier left the bank, believing his cash to be correct. As far as Mr. Napier's memory went, when making up his cash, he had one bag in the tray of gold scales under his counter. When leaving his office for tea, he placed the balance of the cash in the strong room, but he could not remember if he removed the bag with the 1,000 sovereigns in it. He left the room unlocked, and when he returned he did not think of the matter. During the evening there were several clerks of the bank in and out of the premises, besides messengers and caretakers. On the Saturday, Mr. Napier made up his accounts again and counted his cash, which he found £1,000 short. The money was never traced, but the prisoner was kept under surveillance night and day for several months. For some 8 months there was no change in his mode of living, but at the expiration of that period he left the bank, commenced to spend money and made a book on the races. He announced that he'd won £1,000 in one of Miller's sweeps, but the detectives were not able to obtain the information they desired at that point, and was left an open question whether Corbett had won the money, as he asserted, although they were certain in their own mind that he was spending the money missing from the bank. It was ascertained that he bought bank and other shares and that he began to lead a rather fast life, but there was no proof of his direct guilt, and consequently no action could be taken regarding him. During the time he was employed at the bank, on several occasions, while his father, the caretaker, was ill, he received bullion from country banks and assisted to place it in the safe in the strong room. He thus became familiar with the arrangements followed and must have also taken advantage of the opportunities thus afforded by obtaining duplicates of the keys. On the 22nd of November 1883, in the Kilmore Free Press in Victoria, the commercial bank robbery. The board appointed to inquire and report as to the distribution of the reward of £1,000 offered by the directors of the commercial bank for the discovery of the perpetrator of the recent extensive robbery, made awards amounting in all to £400 to Mr. Corbett, the father of the young man convicted of the robbery, and 2 sisters. Mr. Corbett has declined to accept the award and has refunded it to the directors, who, while recognising the excellent motives which actuate Mr. Corbett in the matter, cannot permit him to relinquish his portion of the award. The following correspondence has passed between him and the General Manager of the bank. To the Directors of the Commercial Bank of Australia Limited. Gentlemen, I beg to offer you my most sincere thanks for the consideration and kindness I received from you during the number of years I was in your service, and I think I can say with a clear conscience that I served you faithfully during that period. I have also to express my deep regret for the crime committed by a member of my family, and for which he is now justly undergoing punishment. You are aware that the principal information which led to his arrest and the recovery of the property was furnished by myself and 2 of my daughters. After the trial, it occurred to me that the reward which had been offered would go to persons who were not in any important degree instrumental in effecting the arrest and recovering the property, and that the bank would be unjustly mutilated in a large amount. In order to avoid this, I deemed it my duty to put in a claim on behalf of myself and my 2 daughters, with the full intention of refunding the bank whatever amount might be awarded to us by the board, this being the only reparation I could possibly make. On no account would I or any of my family have preferred any claim, as I considered it was only my and their duty to have afforded every assistance and information under the circumstances, without thought or hope of reward. The 3 gentlemen who kindly undertook to consider the equity of the various claims have awarded us the sum of £400. I have much pleasure in handing over the amount to you, with the full concurrence of my 2 daughters. The crime for which R.H. Corbett is now suffering has brought ruin and disgrace on myself and family, and though in the excitement of the time and in the consciousness of perfect innocence, your treatment of me appears unnecessarily harsh, I have under calmer consideration, however, come to the conclusion that it was unavoidable. Before concluding, I would beg to convey my heartfelt thanks to Mr. H. Turner, General Manager, Mr. John McCutcheon, Manager, and Mr. Arthur Nichols, Accountant, and to the officers of the bank generally for the uniform kindness and consideration which I received at their hands during my period of service under them, and which has now come to such an unfortunate termination. I am, gentlemen, your obedient servant, signed Alfred A. Corbett, 14th of November, 1883. Enclosed is a bank cheque in my favour for £200 with my receipt attached. The second, Florence Maud Corbett's receipt and cheque for £150, and Emily Louisa Corbett's receipt and cheque for £50. On the 16th of November 1883, a letter was written back to Mr. Corbett by the Commercial Bank of Australia. Sir, your letter on the 14th, enclosing in the cheques for £400, was duly submitted to the Board of Directors yesterday, and I'm instructed to say that while according you full credit for the motives which prompted you to try and mitigate the bank's loss, they consider the retention by them of any portion of the award would be open to misconstruction, and they cannot therefore accept the proffered refund. The task of distributing the reward was rendered more difficult by the fact, at once apparent to the arbitrators, that it had not been earned by any special services of anyone, but I consider that the assistance rendered by you was at least equally deserving of recognition with that of any of the other claimants. I therefore return the cheque herewith and take this opportunity of expressing my personal sympathy under the affliction which has befallen you, and my opinion that your own integrity has in no way been compromised by the ill deeds of your son. Yours faithfully, Henry G. Turner, General Manager. So a little on the Corbett family. The father was Alfred Elkanah Corbett. He'd been born on the 22nd of June 1828 in Worcestershire, England. He arrived in Melbourne on the 19th of September 1853 when he was 25, and he married Catherine Lambourne in Melbourne on the 13th of February 1855. Catherine was 8 years younger than Alfred and also had been born in England. She'd come out to Australia in August 1853 as a 16-year-old assigned servant. They had 16 children, with 13 surviving infancy. Alfred Corbett died on the 6th of January 1906 at Clifton Hill, Victoria, aged 77, and Catherine died in 1919 at the age of 83. Alfred and Catherine's firstborn was Sarah Jane Corbett. She was born on the 28th of December 1855 in Victoria. She married George Smeebert in Greenwich, Victoria on the 27th of April 1876, when she was 20. Her husband was 15 years older than her. They had 9 children together. George was Scottish, and they lived in Taronga Road, Hawthorn. Their home was quite a beautiful home, so it seemed that they did very well for themselves. Sarah died on the 7th of June 1932 in Auburn, Victoria, at the age of 76. The death notice of Sarah was in the paper. Mrs. Sarah J. Smeebert died at her home at Taronga Road, Auburn. She was the widow of Mr. George Smeebert, for many years the chief of the telegraphic engineering branch of the Victorian Postal Department, who died in 1899. Her brother-in-law, the late Mr. James Smeebert, was a former Deputy Postmaster General for Victoria. Mrs. Smeebert has left a family of 3 sons and 2 daughters. So she certainly seemed to be a law-abiding citizen that married somebody with quite a big standing in Melbourne at the time. The next sibling was Richard Henry Corbett, who died at the age of 1 year old. Then there was Emily Eliza Corbett, the sister that was mentioned that visited him in jail. She was born in 1858, and she married Walter Wallace in New Zealand in 1890. They had a son, Walter Elkanah Wallace, in 1896 at Timaru in New Zealand, and Emily lived in New Zealand for the remainder of her life, where she died at Johnsonville near Wellington in New Zealand in 1939 at the age of 81. He had a younger sister, Kate Isabella Corbett, who died as an infant, and then the next sister was Clara Isabel Corbett, who was born in 1862 at Gisborne. Clara had a son, Henry Hammond Corbett, on the 8th of April 1886 in Carlton when she was 23. He died the same year he was born. She married Gustav George Kempter in 1886 when she was 24, and they had 6 children. Gustav and Clara eloped. Gustav was a waiter, and Clara's sister, Sarah Smeebert, never spoke to her again. Clara's parents, Catherine and Alfred, eventually forgave her. When one of their children was born up in Sydney, Gustav was listed with his occupation as a caterer. Clara died in 1940 in Heidelberg, Victoria, at the age of 78. Another sibling was Kate Isabella Corbett, was born in 1861 in Essendon, Victoria, and she died on the 27th of December 1861. A brother, Alfred Charles Corbett, was born on the 20th of August 1864 at White Hills near Bendigo, Victoria. He married Sarah Joseph on the 7th of November 1888 in Melbourne at the age of 24. They had 6 children together, and Alfred was a plumber. They lived in Richmond. He became insolvent in 1893. He died in 1904 at the Yarra Bend Asylum, aged only 40, and when his youngest child was only 4 years old. A sister, Florence Maud Corbett, was born in 1866. She married Jocelyn Jeffreys Downs on the 4th of April 1904 in Perth, Western Australia, when she was 37. Her husband was 15 years younger than her. They had a daughter, Ethel Isabel Downs, on the 29th of July 1906 in Perth, when Florence was 40. and she died in 1916 in Perth, Western Australia, aged only 50. Another sister, Alice Kate Corbett, was born on the 18th of February 1869 at Spring Creek, Victoria. She married William Ford at Tottenham Villa in Clifton Hill, Victoria on the 17th of July 1902 when she was 33 and William 51. They had 2 children, William Wycliffe Ford and Alice Kathleen Ford. She died in 1953 in Chatswood, New South Wales, aged 84. Francis William Corbett was born on the 22nd of September 1867 at Coy's Diggings in Victoria. In 1909 was living at Fitzroy North, working as a sawyer. He was living at the same address as Ethel and Catherine Corbett. He remained in this occupation and at this address with his sisters. He did not marry, and he died on the 27th of April 1945 in Victoria, aged 77. Edith Blanche Evelyn Corbett was born in 1871. She married William Theodore Pearce at Tottenham Villa in Clifton Hill on the 4th of June 1902 when she was 31 and William 41. They had a daughter, Catherine Thelma Pearce, in 1906. William was a butcher with his brothers and they lived at Gisborne, Victoria. After William's death, Edith moved to Melbourne and lived in Caulfield, and she died in 1940 in Caulfield, Victoria, aged 69. Marion Thekla King Corbett was born on the 3rd of February 1875 in North Melbourne. She married Walter Drabble on the 18th of April 1900 at Claremont, Western Australia, when she was 25 and Walter 26. They had 7 children together. Walter had been born in Perth and he was a merchant, and she died on the 30th of October 1934 at Subiaco, Western Australia at the age of 59. The announcement of her funeral was in the Perth West Australian on the 2nd of November 1934. The funeral of the late Mrs. Marion King Drabble, wife of Mr. Walter Drabble of Nedlands and of W. Drabble Limited, Claremont, took place at the Caretaker Cemetery yesterday morning. The late Mrs. Drabble was born in Melbourne, Victoria, and arrived in Western Australia in 1899 and has lived at Claremont ever since. She always took a keen interest in infant and child welfare work and took a prominent part in founding the Claremont Infant Health Centre. She attended the first meeting and became the Foundation Secretary. Mrs. Drabble has been a member of the committee practically ever since, and she was very helpful in obtaining the necessary plant and furnishings at the inception, and her untiring efforts made her an outstanding member of the committee. She was an expert needlewoman and had executed many fine pieces of fancy work. Mrs. Drabble was thorough in all she undertook, devoted to her home and family, and happy in her desire to help others. She has been a patient sufferer for the past 6 months. Attending her funeral was her husband Walter, her sons and her son-in-law, as well as brothers-in-law and nephews and nieces. The directors and employees of her husband's firm were also present at the funeral, as well as many leading businessmen in Perth. The hearse was laden with beautiful floral tributes, and widespread expressions of sympathy have been extended to the bereaved relatives. Ethel May Corbett was born on the 21st of September 1876 in Melbourne. As mentioned earlier, she lived with her sister Catherine and her brother Frederick in North Fitzroy. She married Elbin Thomas Rochfort in 1926 in Mossman, New South Wales, at the age of 50. Elbin had been born in Jerilderie, and he was much younger than Ethel, him being 26 when they married. Interestingly, Ethel listed her age as 41 on the marriage certificate. Elbin had been a stock inspector around Jerilderie, but he was also the seller of phonographs, so the later record player, and he sold them in the district. At the time of their marriage, Ethel was living in Sydney. In fact, she co-owned a company. On the 12th of January 1926 in the Melbourne Herald, it said that Corbett and Money Proprietary Limited, with capital of £10,000 in £1 shares, was a registered company and formed to acquire as a going concern to the business of art furnishers and decorators carried on by Ethel May Corbett and Lawrence Charles Money, registered in Little Collins Street, Melbourne. Subscribers Ethel May Corbett and George Nicol McNaughton. First directors Ethel May Corbett and Lawrence Charles Money. Ethel died on the 20th of February 1968 in Elwood, Victoria, aged 91. Another sibling, Edward George Corbett, was born on the 25th of March 1878 in North Melbourne. He married Ada Mary Isom in Durban, South Africa on the 20th of September 1909 when he was 31. They had 2 sons and a daughter, and his wife Ada died in 1932, and Edward died at the Entabeni nursing home in Durban, South Africa on the 13th of August 1937 at the age of 59. Arthur Hector Elkina Corbett was born on the 14th of March 1880 in Melbourne. He married Nellie Pryor Petsa on the 7th of August 1908 in Johannesburg, South Africa, when he was 28. He was known as Elf, and he was a mechanic on the Rhodesia Railways. They had 8 children together, and at the age of 64, he passed away from tuberculosis at the Johannesburg Sanatorium on the 18th of August 1944. And the youngest child of the family was Elsie Mildred Corbett, and she was stillborn in March 1882. Now a little more on Richard Henry Corbett. He was born on the 28th of February 1860 in Essendon. His jail description said he was 5'9", with brown hair and grey eyes, round-shouldered with a scar on the front of the left side of the head and eyebrows that nearly meet. He obtained his freedom by remission on the 7th of July 1888, and there's no trace of Richard Henry Corbett after that time, so no doubt he has changed his name, but he was unable to be found. So I hope you enjoyed the story of the Ballarat bank robbery.
If you are interested in sharing your story on my podcast Family History Mysteries, please go to my Facebook page and send me a message. If you would like some assistance in filling in the gaps in your family tree to see what mysteries you solve, please get in touch. And don't forget, you can have early access to episodes by subscribing, and you'll also gain access to bonus episodes.